Corn in the 17th and 18th century was extremely important for not only native peoples, but for European colonists also. And some of the dishes favored by the First Nations peoples were also favorites of the colonists. And we're going to be making one of those dishes, succotash. Thanks for joining us today on 18th Century Cooking. Succotash is a very interesting dish. It remains popular even to this day in certain regions of the United States. The very first recipe that we've found published for succotash is from the mid-1800s, but it's a much older dish. To learn about the earlier history of this food, you have to turn to old travel journals of European explorers and settlers. The word succotash is a phonetic mutation of a number of similar Native American words. And the earliest that we've found this dish by name, at least that we have found, is from Jonathan Carver's book from 1778, Travels Throughout the Interior Parts of North America. Here's a little excerpt. One dish which answers nearly the same as bread is in use among a number of eastern nations where Indian corn grows. It is reckoned extremely palatable by all the Europeans who enter their dominions. This is composed of their unripe corn, as before described, and beans in the same state boiled together with bear's flesh, which renders it beyond comparison delicious. And they call this food succotash. The earliest reference we found to succotash did not call it by name. It's a reference from 1674 by Daniel Gookin, and it is titled Historical Collections of the Indians in New England. Their food is generally boiled maize or Indian corn mixed with kidney beans, or sometimes without. Also, they frequently boil in this pottage fish and flesh of all sorts, either newly taken or dried. And also they mix with the said pottage several sorts of roots, as Jerusalem artichokes and ground nuts and other roots, and pumpkins and squashes, and also several sorts of nuts or masts, as acorns, chestnuts, walnuts. These husked and dried and powdered, they thicken their pottage therewith. By now, the dictionaries have settled on a spelling for succotash, and pretty much all the modern recipes you find for succotash are exactly the same. But as there were a number of ways to spell succotash in the 18th century, there were undoubtedly the same number of ways to fix it. Today's recipe is an adaptation. We're taking the mid-19th century recipe and we're adding to it some of the same things you'll find in the earlier references. I'm using diced jowl bacon for this, about 4 ounces. You can use regular bacon if you'd like. I'm going to brown this in our cast iron pot. As I read earlier, the Native Americans would have used, well, basically any meat they had available. It's likely that European settlers making this dish would use salt pork or bacon. If you'd like to make a vegetarian version of this dish, just leave out the meat. Once that's browned, we'll add 2 or 3 quarts of water, and we'll bring that up to a low boil. While that's warming up, I have to trim off the very last bit of corn here. I've got 8 to 10 ears. You want to be careful not to cut too closely to the cob. I'll explain why in just a moment. I've got about 2 pounds, or say 4 cups, of trimmed corn kernels. In addition, we need 1.5 cups of beans. Today I'm using baby lima beans. Let's add the beans and the corn cobs to this boiling water, and I'm going to let this cook for about 20 minutes. If you trim your corn too close to the cob, then they'll give a disagreeable taste to the dish. You can use canned or dried kidney beans in this instead of the lima beans. If you use the dried beans, make sure to soak them overnight beforehand. Other vegetables may have been added to this, really depending on what was available in the season. Now I'm making a summertime version of succotash here. You could do a fall version or a winter version with dried beans, with dried hominy, and sometimes adding something like squash or pumpkin. Hopefully in the near future, we'll have an episode on making hominy. Jason Richards, one of our viewers, recently sent us a little cookbook on Native American cooking called Cherokee Cooklore. We were fascinated to find a succotash recipe that had dried corn, dried beans, and squash. Thank you so much for sending that little cookbook to us, Jason. Once the beans and the cobs have been boiled for, say, 20 minutes or so, remove the cobs and add the corn kernels. Season this with some salt and black pepper. Then let it boil for another 15 minutes. Well, let's give this a try. This is something, if you want to top this off with a little bit of butter, you'll probably enjoy that. So I'm gonna add a little butter. Wonderful summertime flavors. You get that beautiful corn, like sweet corn flavor. The beans settle down very nicely in this. They don't come out too much. You know, I'm not a big fan of lima beans. Turns out really good in this dish. The juice is wonderful. And of course, you can't go wrong with butter and pepper on there as a seasoning. I'm sure they may not have had, you know, those kind of choices, but still a wonderful, wonderful flavors. A nice medley. And of course, the bacon flavor comes out at the very end. Very nice. This dish is great with its roots in 17th century and even earlier Native American cooking. All the things you've seen here today, you know, all the cookware that we use, the bowls, the spoons, all these things are available on our website or in our print catalog. I want to thank you for joining us today as we continue to experiment and try out these very interesting things, as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century. If you're new to our channel, I want to welcome you. You can subscribe by clicking the button right up here. Also check out our related videos. Thanks so much for watching.